Peace, my name is Tish Jones, founder and executive director of True Art Speaks. I'm also a poet, cultural producer, educator, and organizer. Today, I'm gonna be just having a conversation with you all about, it's a one-sided conversation, sorry, Zoom and COVID and whatnot. But today we're gonna be talking about hip hop history and its connection to Black history. This is a subject that I'm really passionate about, as my organization is an organization that is rooted in hip hop arts and culture. Our mission at True Art Speaks is to cultivate literacy, leadership, and social justice through the study and application of spoken word and hip hop culture. So this subject is near and dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about it, and I'm passionate about letting other people in the community know what the value of hip hop is and how we can utilize hip hop as a tool for positive social transformation. So thank you just for your curiosity and interest. I want to start actually by making sure that we're talking about the same thing when we're talking about hip hop. Often people, when they hear the phrase hip hop or the words hip hop, they think rap music. And hip hop is so much more than rap music. Rap music is a part of the culture, but there are a lot of other components. So I'm going to give you the organization that we use at True Art Speaks. We define hip hop as a social justice-based culture and movement comprised of 9 elements, circa the Bronx, 1973. Now it sounds like a long definition, but it's really important. Place is important because it lets you know about a people, a time, and another sort of layer of culture, right? And those 9 elements are important because that's the nuance of what makes up the actual culture. If a culture is comprised of language, artifacts, and etc., it's important to think about all 9 of those elements. Boom. So let's bust it down. What are the 9 elements of hip hop? There are 4 core elements of hip hop that people often talk about. You hear them all the time. Let's start with the one that you think of readily, right? Which is MCing. Other people refer to that as rap. MCing is the sort of study and application of divine speech, literary art, poetry, etc. Some say that the acronym for rap is rhythm and poetry. That's one core element of hip hop. Another is the DJ. We would not have the culture if it were not for the DJ. If we're talking about the history of the culture, it was started, for all intents and purposes, by DJ Kool Herc, who came to the United States from Jamaica and was really all about him and his sister throwing a party. And that's really where hip hop got started. We can dig into that, or I can give you some resources on how to dig into that later. But the DJ, they make the music, they play the music, they select the music, and it is the art of that musical production and etc. Yeah, that's the second element. The third, breaking, b-boying, b-girling, is the art of the dance, right? It incorporates a lot of different things and has looked a lot of different ways over the past, 40 plus years that we've been immersed in this culture. It encompasses forms of like, capoeira, African dance. I would even say, a very specific type of athleticism goes into this thing, but we're talking b-boys, b-girls, just general break curves. You've also seen some of the popping, locking, and tutting, and in a contemporary sense, I would say that crump is a part of hip-hop culture and hip-hop dance, yeah? That's the third element. Fourth element is graffiti. Folks who predate hip-hop would say style writing, tagging, bombing, muralism, etc. And I would say in a contemporary sense, you see a lot more muralism being sort of categorized and engulfed inside of this hip hop culture piece. I think in Minnesota, the institutions that have really supported graffiti artists and style writers are organizations like Juxtaposition Arts and Intermediate Arts, which is no longer with us, but we had a free wall in Minneapolis at Intermediate Arts that was really important to the culture. And the institution itself with B-Girl B, which was the first international summit of women in hip hop in the world. It was right here in our backyard in Minneapolis. So those are the 4 core elements of hip hop. And again, it's important that we talk about these elements before we talk about the history so that we understand sort of this mix of where everything is coming from. And we know what we're talking about, what I'm talking about when I say hip hop. That said, the most important element of all, and this is in agreement between all the heads, that's knowledge. also known as knowledge of self, also known as knowledge, power, wisdom, and understanding. That is the fifth element of hip hop. And that element is the self is definitely about the I, right? Understanding who you are, what your purpose is, and engaging with your art in terms of study and craft, and understanding your proximity to others in space and time and era and epoch and etc. But it's also about self as it relates to community, right? So a knowledge of who you are in relationship to others. Think concepts like Ubuntu, I am because you are, etc., right? That's a very, very important element of hip hop. It drives the culture, arguably. The other elements that are lesser known and lesser discussed, but we see them specifically in contemporary hip hop culture, are things like fashion. You know what I mean? Fashion is mega important. I think that some of the most classic examples are when you point to cats like Kanye West. Y'all remember when Kanye came out and Ye had like the collar, you know what I mean? He flipped his little collar up on his polo and everybody was rocking polos. Or when Lil Wayne was like doing mega features back in 2008 and he had the like skinny jeans and the wallet chains and everybody wanted skinny jeans and wallet chains and whatnot. We influence culture. It's ridiculous how much we influence culture. You know what I mean? I'm into a gazillion chains on your neck, the fitted cap, whatever it is, we do it, we did it. Hip hop does that. Another thing would be language. Our influence on language permeates all types of cultures, permeates mainstream media and etc. So when we're talking about hip hop, we're also talking about our influence and impact on language, and not just the English language, but language all across the world, right? Because this is a global movement, culture, and phenomena. So just a minute ago, I said, yeah, I mean, that's hip hop, you know what I mean? In a mainstream media sense, the commercials, the Sprite commercials that were using that phrase that what's up, all of that's hip hop. That came from some brothers who would actually just greet themselves in that way. You can read more about that in another resource I can drop later, but we influence the culture. E40 has a dictionary out, a hip hop dictionary, right? The other thing I would say is important is the rest of these elements. Entrepreneurialism. That is a core element of hip hop. In terms of the hustle, again, hip hop started because DJ Kool Herc threw a party. His sister, they were mapping out how they were gonna pay for school clothes. That's really what it was. How were we gonna pay for new school clothes? The school year's about to start, you know what I mean? And they thought of this really dope way. He had some of the best speakers in the hood, you know, he was a great selector. He knew how to throw a party. He knew how to put together a fly playlist. And that was the ingenuity, you know what I mean? That's the entrepreneurial spirit. And it's been a part of hip hop culture for as long as we can remember. It predates hip hop culture. Last element, which is not necessarily the last element, but it's the last of this list that I have to give to you, is beatboxing. The study and application of making music with your body. Yeah? So all of that's beatboxing. It's also a part of the culture. When you didn't have or don't have access to technology and whatnot, you can still make it funky. You know what I'm saying? Just use whatever you got. So thank you for, engaging with that. And I think, again, it's really important to lay the foundation for what we're talking about before we talk about it, right? Because some of these things, like, again, capoeira, Brazilian style fighting, making music with your body, dance, all of that stuff predates hip hop. But what makes it a culture is all that stuff they found itself, right? When I talk about hip hop being born in the Bronx in 1973, all of those different elements sort of came together in this really unique way at this very specific time. And that marriage at that time is what made the culture. And when we start to talk about how it's connected to Black history, right? And hip hop as a movement and culture that was started by Black and brown people in the Bronx, then we start to get into like the politics of American history, right? A really important thing, I won't go too far back, let's start in the 60s, if we're talking about hip hop culture, Black history, and the connection. Let's start in the 60s. We're at the height of the Black Power movement, right? We're, in this sort of Vietnam War space, we're in this, post-white flight space, we're in this sort of, real creation of the ghettos in America, and some terrible, terrible housing regulations and rules, redlining and gentrification, all of that stuff, right? Is sort of what makes this thing. We also have the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. We have the assassination of Malcolm X, right? All of those things happening. Plus we're in this hyper drive space around building freeways through urban areas, right? It happened in St. Louis. It happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the historic Rondo neighborhood, which is where I'm from, which is where my family is from. They built a freeway right through a blooming and blossoming and healthy, vibrant Black neighborhood. They did the same thing in New York. So when you hear early hip hop records and you hear the burning Bronx, the Bronx is aflame, those aren't metaphors. It's not hyperbolic. It's not an exaggeration. It is truth, right? It was very intentional at that time, early 70s, late 60s, in this attempt to build a freeway through the Black and brown neighborhood that insurance agencies, homeowners, building owners, property owners, the fire department, etc., they were setting people's homes on fire to get them out of the way so that they could build this expressway through their neighborhood, right? So there was also at this time, one of the reasons that the entrepreneurial spirit needed to kick in is that people were super destitute. People were kind of down and out, you know what I mean? And as a result of the homes being burnt down and project tenements being built, people were also stacked on top of each other in these really less than ideal living situations, but closer together to build, closer together to sort of bridge these connections, closer together to be in community, to think about, when the party was going to happen and so on and so forth. So there's this mix of a culture being created, right? That's really important. The freeway thing as a nugget for the etymology of hip hop. In tandem with that was gang culture and gang life, and all of this resting on the back of, again, the Black Power movement, right? The struggle for Black liberation in the United States, at a height, at a peak. And the gang truce that happened is a really important aspect of this history, because it was those brothers, and specifically Africa Bambaataa. He had taken a trip to Africa. He had come back from Africa, and he had this mindset to have the brothers that were following him, big gangsters, you know what I mean? Whatever your mind, gangsters, fit brothers who were fearless, right? Had them sort of rethinking some things, going back to the philosophies of the Black Panther Party, the 10-point manifesto, and et cetera, to really think about the ways that they could be positively contributing to community. So hip hop rests on those things. So those brothers who were gangsters were, also instructed to tap into their creativity. Yo, if you got beef, instead of, duking it out physically, let's do this b-boy thing. Let's have this dance battle instead. You know what I'm saying? Let's build for the community instead. Let's throw a party instead of beef. So they found alternative ways through the culture to think about positive contributions to the community, right? And again, all of that stuff is important because one of the reasons why gangs were so affluent at that time, and specifically in that region, has to do with some of the ways in which Black people, brown people were policed at the time. So hip hop also finds its roots in sort of an anti-policing movement, and a way in which Black and brown folks had to come together to protect themselves from police in our communities. Yeah, and this is American history again, right? So we keep going. If we're moving into the mid 70s, actually let me come back real quick, because in those early 70s we have to give the date, right? We all say hip hop started in 1973. 1973, August 11th, that's when they say hip hop was given its name. And you can look up any of this stuff if you're interested in hip hop or hip hop history. One of the greatest resources that we have, folks refer to it as the hip hop encyclopedia, or the hip hop Bible, hip hop encyclopedia, whatever, is Can't Stop, Won't Stop by Jeff Chang. But anyway, August 11th, 1973, they say that's when Bambaataa gave hip hop its name. And the rest is kind of history from there. We fast forward, we look at some of the things that were happening in community, big points in hip hop history. and the ways in which hip hop connected to blackness, I'm gonna move us 10 years later. So we go from 73 to 83. And in 83 is when Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 dropped the record, The Message. So important in hip hop. So it's so connected to what I do as a poet. That record shattered the sort of false image that America had successfully portrayed about what it was like to live in this country, specifically for black people, specifically for brown people, right? There were some dope records that had come out before that, you know what I mean? They were kind of fun though, fun party records or whatever. And even the ones that weren't fun, they hadn't had that same global success that The Message had. And if you're not familiar with The Message, just the soundbite that most people know is broken glass everywhere. Actually, I'll give you the hook. The hook is, don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. Yeah, so anyway, that's what most people, if they don't know the name of the song, they know that little clip, right? That soundbite. Anyway, what happened with that record is they shot a video, and they shot the video in the hood. So the very specific and descriptive sort of, things that were described in that song, people were able to see, right? So it was a journey through the circumstance, through the lived experience of brown folks who were trying to figure out life post-police, who were trying to figure out, or over-policing in the neighborhood, I should say, who were trying to figure out, life in these project tenements, in these, burnt down and abandoned buildings with very few resources, you know what I'm saying, in the ghetto in America. And that record having such a global impact and having such, high return in terms of media output and accessibility, it ended up shattering perceptions. Before that, we see, a lot of green pastures, picket fences, nuclear families, and, it's the land of promise and dreams, which is not to say that it is not that. It is very much that, and can be that. It is also these other things for some people. And that is, for me, when we talk about hip hop and the power and potential of hip hop, for me, it comes back to hip hop as a source of media, right? The tagging, the bombing we're doing on the trains, there's messages moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, right? One, we're making names for ourselves when we do those kinds of things, but also like the issues that we're putting up. Like right now, there's trains all throughout here that say justice for George Floyd, right? That say, stop the pipeline. They're on the trains, they're moving, right? Those messages are moving, so they're subliminal, they're overt, etc. That's a form of media, that's a form of communication. So when Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, when they dropped that record, and that record was talking about the conditions that brown people were living in at that time, and it spread, what happened was people unlocked their own potential in other places. Like, I can tell my story like that, right? Like I can process what my experience is like that. And it opened up this thing in all these other places, right? So you see like hip hop in South Africa, hip hop in China, hip hop in Brazil and Latin America, right? You start to see folks utilizing hip hop as a means to spread a message and or awareness, right? Same thing with the music. The music, even down to the sort of percussive nature of the music, it goes back to a very Afrocentric place, which is like our relationship to the drum, right? And the call and response that we have always had, and the desire that we have always had as brown people to be back in relationship with the drum, which is something that was taken away from us when we came to this country. So when we're talking about Black history, right? And when we talk about like brown folks and like brown folks in hip hop, we're talking about like Afro-Caribbean folks, Afro-Latino folks. We're talking about the influence of, Africa, Black culture in the context of hip hop. It's old, it's long standing that we come back to this place. So the music is mad important because it is our relationship with the drum. It's what naturally moves our bodies, yeah? Cool, so that's 83, The Message. Hip hop becomes like this global thing. Yeah. Then we move forward. I'm gonna move us forward again. I'm gonna move us into like the mid 90s. Moving us into the mid 90s because I think I want to make some space for poetry. I want to make some space for poetry because in the mid 90s you have, you see, you know, gangster rap and your Tupacs and your Biggies and your Death Rows and the whole record label and et cetera, right? You also see like a boom of Southern rap coming up. So you start to see like these regional things happen in this really beautiful way. But then the poets, there's this way in which poets enter into hip hop in this really fun, really juicy way. And again, like when we talk about that first element, the MC, the poet, divine speech, poetry, mastering that as an art form, the poets have always been a part of this culture. In fact, the last poets who are outside of hip hop, they're hip hop adjacent, right? They had so much influence on MCs today, right? But you see your Nasir Joneses, Nas, you see your Lauryn Hills, you start to see cats who are like, you know, walking that line, your Erykah Badu's and et cetera, you know what I mean? And that's in the 90s, so you get this, what some folks like to call conscious rap, conscious hip hop, which had always existed, right? 87, Rakim, you know, KRS-Ones, et cetera, et cetera. It was never not a part of the culture, but it became super popularized and sort of coined in the 90s. So I want to move us up to where we are right now and acknowledge the through line that things don't change. They say there's nothing new under the sun, right? So I think what we're looking at right now is 2021, February 2021. So this is dated, right? Hip hop is right now speaking to the movement, has always been speaking to the movement, right? I mentioned that record, The Message from 1983. We've got records, you know, supporting presidential runs, right? When Jesse was running, we had records supporting Jesse when he was running. When, you know, the Reaganomics era hit, we had records that were talking about the influx of crack cocaine in brown neighborhoods, right? We also had MCs speaking about the ways in which that was also a very structured thing, you know, and the role that the military had to play in that, right? Right now, the most recent sort of BET Awards, right? If we're talking about place-based things and hip-hop as a global movement, we saw DaBaby on stage, on video stage, reenacting the murder of George Floyd, right, to raise awareness around the current movement that we're in for Black liberation. Hip-hop is not divorced from Black history. It has its foundation in Black history. So there are a lot of records that we're hearing right now. There are a lot of murals that we're seeing right now. There are a lot of artists at the forefront of, you know, change work. And I think it's important that, you know, while we doing our thing, while we dancing, we bopping, you know what I'm saying, doing the latest little TikTok, we also bridge the connection and understand how powerful this movement is and what our responsibility to the movement is, and what opportunities that we have through the culture to spread awareness and create change. That's my spiel on hip hop. Thank you for listening.